artist waves. We making waves, waves, waves. Artist waves. We making waves.
All right, hello everybody. Welcome back. Artist Waves Live, Season 2, interview number 1. How you doing? My name is Jeff Gorra. That was K-Bong on our theme music, and Happy New Year. Happy 2021. We made it. I hope everyone's doing all right. Hope everyone's well. I'm really excited to be back in the saddle again, back in the chair, and starting up another series of Artist Waves Live, and I am really, really excited for today's guest, and that would be legendary rock photographer, Mr. Bob Gruen. Bob Gruen's going to come on and chat with us in a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about, Bob's got a new book out that came out in October. It's called Right Place, Right Time. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk a little bit about John Lennon, and we're going to just, we're just going to have a good time. So I thank you for joining us on a Wednesday morning edition of Artist Waves Live and the kickoff of Season 2, and it's going to be a lot of fun. A lot of guests coming up, and I think Bob is already here. So I'm gonna get Bob in, and why don't we just get right to it? Why don't we start chatting? All right, excuse my reach. Sent Bob a little request to join us live, and here we go. A lot of construction on my street, so please forgive the background noise. Nothing I could do about that, but such is live from home, right? And we're still home, and that's just the beauty of the beast, man. All right, so Bob should be connecting here with us in a second. I just sent a request. You simply, if it comes through, accept, and then we'll do a little face-to-face chat. All right, let's try that again. All right, sent request. Hopefully it's a pop-up there, Bob, if you can hear me. And it's just a matter of tapping that accept. There we go.
Hi.
Hey, Bob, how are you?
Pretty good.
Thanks for joining. Jeff Gorra here with Artist Waves. Happy New Year to you. I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today.
All right. I'm glad to be here.
Are you in New York City?
I'm in New York today, yeah. We've been staying up in the Catskills, but I've been coming into the city for a day or two to take care of business.
Very cool. I like the...
luckily, the galleries, Morrison Hotel Gallery and a couple of the other galleries I work with are selling prints, so I have to come in and sign them and send them out. And that's good.
Very cool. Do you still have a New York City studio, or have you? Yeah,
I'm sitting in it right now.
I like the photo backdrop. I'm trying to copy your style a little bit here with my home studio. So right on. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to talk with me. I've had a chance to dive into your book and to read it pretty thoroughly. And, put some stories behind some of the photos, which is really what Artist Waves, that's it.
Does that come out backwards?
A little bit, but not really.
I don't know how to, I don't know how to make it go forward. But anyway, that's the book cover. Yeah, I'm very proud of the book and glad to get it out. It's a long time in the making.
Well worth it. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And, Artist Waves is all about the stories behind the art, the stories behind the music. And I mean, that if ever there was a book that tells stories behind the photos and your journey, that was it. And, what I really enjoyed was right off the bat, you talk about this element of story, being in the car, I think it was 1979 with the band Riot in Texas.
Right.
And I zoomed past the exit because everyone was everyone was pretty entrenched in your stories. And so I thought that was like a really unique way to start off the messaging behind, I think what the gist of the book was this element of story, this element of freedom, and what, photographing artists and musicians and what that means in terms of capturing the moments. Was there a lot of thought going into that, of setting that stage of this element of the stories that are, ingrained in your photos?
Well, it's not something you can really set up, to capture what's going on. You have to just kind of be aware of the present and what's going on, and I'm kind of trying to capture which moments are meaningful and capture the feeling of what's going on. Because I try to get the feeling of what's going on rather than just the facts. And it's something that came to me early. I think some of my inspirations were, first of all, my photography inspirations were Henry Cartier-Bresson, who always got the decisive moment, Man Ray, who made art with photography. My motto is always ars gratiae pecuniae, which is art for the sake of money. I always wanted to make money, but you have to pay your rent. And, and a guy named Ouija, Arthur Fellig, who was always known for being in the right place at the right time. And I try to do that, and that's why the book is titled Right Place, Right Time. But then you have to do the right thing. You can't just be there. You have to contribute to the situation, make it worthwhile, make a reason for you to be there. I try to get some good pictures and give them to the people so that there's a reason for them to want me to come back. But I think that, in the 60s, a lot of my inspiration came from D.A. Penbacker and the Bob Dylan movie, Don't Look Back. And people like Godard, who were, kind of coming up with the cinema verite idea of just capturing what's going on and letting people get the feeling of that, rather than setting something up and try to create some artificial feeling. So it came to me earlier. It's the kind of the way I look at things, not something I studied. I never went to photography school. When I was 5 years old, my mom had the hobby of photography. She liked to develop and print her own pictures. And so when I was too little to leave running around the house, but too big to go to sleep very early, she took me in the darkroom with her and taught me how to develop and print my own pictures. And I took to it right away. When I was 8 years old, one of the few things I remember of any of my birthdays when I was a kid was that my parents gave me my first camera. And I remember waking up and seeing the box. I mean, I have a clear memory of being so excited at getting my first camera and starting to take pictures. The only present I remember when I was 13 was getting my first 13 millimeter camera, a 35 millimeter camera, and advancing like that. And then it just developed. I mean, I kind of grew up when there was rock and roll. I saw Elvis Presley on TV. I heard it on the radio. I saw the Beatles on on Ed Sullivan TV by accident. I had no idea who they were. I was out in college in Illinois, and I walked into a hotel. I was going out to dinner on a Sunday night with friends of mine, and there was some screaming on the other side of the lobby, and I went over to see what people were screaming about on TV, and it was the Beatles, and that was my first introduction to that. Having no idea that I would get to meet them or have any connection with them at that point, I was not taking pictures of any rock and roll. But then I dropped out of college and I lived with a rock and roll band because the idea of turn on, tune in, and drop out. And I did that. But I actually dropped in because living with a rock and roll band led to me taking pictures of them because that was my hobby and they needed pictures. And a couple of years later, they got a record deal and the record company liked my pictures and hired me to take some more pictures. And then things just started to snowball. From then on, every time I went to a gig, I'd meet more people and they would hire me to do more jobs. And it just, one thing led to another. And here I am today with a book of stories about all the things I've done for the last 50 years.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And I love the journey and, how much work and passion you continue to put into it. One thing that jumped out at me, which was really unique, was you gave a little story in the beginning of the book, towards the beginning of the book, about your car burning down. or your car being torched.
Oh, yes. Yeah,
And
they didn't like us in the neighborhood. They had a
and
very
the only thing
dramatic way of showing that.
yeah, I'm sure there could have been a different way to communicate that, but
Well, it was a shame because we were having our last. We moved into Greenwich Village. It was my first apartment in Greenwich Village. We moved in June. It was $125. There was three of us staying there. Between the three of us, we couldn't come up with the rent money after the initial payment. So by September, they were throwing us out. And but the band at that point, that's when the band started. My friend from high school, Mike Gale, ran into some guys on Bleecker Street, Hank and Al, and they formed a band called the Justice League. With another guy from high school, Tom Weiner, a drummer, and sometimes they rehearsed at Tommy's house in Long Island, but it was easier to rehearse in the apartment. But the Italian neighbors really didn't like all that noise, and finally we were having a big going away party, and the place was packed, and they got so angry they torched my car, which was a drag because I was actually leaving the next morning. I was going to drive away with that car and not come back, but. It was a bit of a setback because I couldn't drive away. We had to postpone that for a couple of days.
Well, the part that I was so taken by was how the two things that remained were the two John Lennon books he had in the glove compartment.
Right. The party was just about over. There was a couple of people left. I remember sitting at the table. The doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there was this chubby lady who was the superintendent, and there was a large fireman in a rubber coat standing next to her. And she was saying, your car is that little black convertible out front, right? And I said, yeah. She said, well, it just burned down. And the cop handed me the two books that had been in the glove compartment. He said, this is what's left. And it's like the only thing left was the two John Lennon books that I had, John Lennon in his own right and A Spaniard in the Works. And I actually still have those two books with the charred edges.
Oh, cool.
Fire. But that was... For some reason, those two books survived in the glove compartment. The whole rest of the car was completely torched up.
That's amazing, especially with what it led to, and that you still have them.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I bring that up is a lot of my attention with a lot of your work has been so fixated on John Lennon as much of my artistic or musical life. And the reason I say that, if you don't mind me saying, is. So I was born the day John Lennon died, within a 2-hour stretch. And
Really?
and my mom always tells me stories about, being in her room and all the nurses in the hospital flooding the room and watching it on TV. And, ever since I can remember, I've been fixated on the existence of John Lennon, his legacy. I watched that 2020. I watched it 3 times.
That was a pretty good one. The ending was kind of long, but they did have some real interesting information.
I mean, I watched it in such detail. I really watched it in such detail because there was such focus on, obviously, that period of time. I used to live by the Dakota, and I'd walk by the strawberry fields all the time. I went to the 30-year on 2010 when everyone was in there and got those pins. I still have my pin, and we're singing. Uh-huh. So, when I think of John Lennon and I think of him visually and his representation of, the whole package of his music and artistic being, obviously your photos are so much part of that. And you talk about freedom and the expression of capturing those moments in the feeling in photos. And so much of those shots of him are off stage. So I'm wondering too, like, given this has been a pretty heavy focus the past few months on John Lennon and the 40th and everything, does it, I have to imagine it means a lot to you still and always. And being connected with his work and his legacy is something that probably is really near and dear to your heart. I've heard you say you think about him more on his birthday than his passing day, which is a pretty special way to think about it. But I'm just wondering now, we've been so John Lennon focused for the past few months. What does it feel like for you right now with that?
Well, there's a lot of mixed feelings. I mean, I do think about him often. I have been involved for many years, with his legacy, first with his presence and then with his legacy. So there's a lot of mixed feelings. I miss him a lot. He was a lot of fun to be with. For many years it hurt really badly that you know, the way he was taken rather than just passing away. Everybody passes away. I mean, Joe Strummer went to sleep on his couch and just woke up dead. You know, he just never got up again. That's different. I miss him a lot too, because we had some great times together. But with John Lennon being murdered is so painful because it's so unnecessary. It was so senseless that for years I just couldn't get over the senselessness of doing something like that on purpose. Especially as the years developed and more people, someone like yourself who was born after he died or a couple hours before or after, I don't know. But, you know, who never met him, never experienced him in the present. And yet are still huge fans of his message and his meaning and things he said. He was very funny. He, you know, related to everybody. He kept everybody around him laughing all the time. I kind of miss that. And in a sense, what's odd is that I don't really remember a lot of the jokes because they were just normal things that people say, but he would put a twist on a word and make it a pun and make it funny and make it relate to 6 other things at the same time. And he just kept everybody laughing. And certainly I miss that. You know, he was a good friend, a fun person to be with. But I'm so impressed that so many people, younger than you, people who were born 20 years later, who are, you know, fans and impressed, and John is part of their lives. And he once said to me that he couldn't tell people what to do. That somebody had approached him to do an advertisement, and he said, if I held up a bar of toothpaste, you know, a tube of toothpaste, and said, use this toothpaste, people would laugh at him. He said, I can't tell people things like that. He said, but he knew that he had a knack for summing up what people were already thinking. I mean, a simple phrase like all we're saying is give peace a chance is something that everybody thinks, but nobody had the simple words to express until John said it. And it passed around the whole world, and everybody in the world relates to that expression. You know, imagine all the people living life in peace. It was never actually said in those simple words. And so he had a unique knack of saying those kind of things. And he also had a great sense of humor. I mean, one of the things I do remember that he said is time that you enjoy wasting is not wasted. One of my favorites. You know?
Right on.
Yeah, you know, words to live by. So there's a lot of mixed feelings. And certainly this fall with the 80th birthday and the 40th anniversary, people tend to really fixate on anniversaries. I miss him every day.
Yeah. I remember the
anniversary of, you know, the loss.
Well, I appreciate your stories and your insight there. It's a special subject matter to me. I remember being at the museum, the exhibit in New York City, and really kind of getting kicked out that, you know, it's time to go. I was so fixated on everything that on his life and all the imagery and the short films and everything. And even during this time, like the holiday season, there's nothing that instills a reaction or a spirit like his, you know, Happy Christmas song, especially when his voice just comes back in over the, you know, in the middle of the songs. There's just such an intrigue and a feeling to him that I almost can't articulate. I've never been able, I'm a writer too, and I've never been able to write about John Lennon and what he's meant to my life other than December 8th, this past December 8th, 2020. It was the only time I felt like I could express what his work has done to me. And I titled it The Day, you know, I was born the day he died. And it's just such a special feeling that I have when it comes to his music and him, and to have that, your imagery attached to it just makes it all that more meaningful. I want to ask you a quick question, just taking a quick step back though, because one thing leading up to that point that I really was fascinated by with your book was, and you've told stories about this before, about how you were able to befriend so many artists who had a mutual respect with you, but then how you would go on tour with them. Because there were so many stories about like, hey, I just hopped on this tour, or there was an open bunk on the bus and I just hopped on the bus. And your mind just was
There's
like,
always room for one more. You know?
But your mind just immediately goes, well, did you have like a bag of clothes? How did you have your equipment? How did you know you'd be gone for 2 weeks and stuff? Like, there's such a free spirit to doing that. What was that like, just being able to pick up and, be in Europe for 2 months?
It was fun. It was definitely fun. And to have that freedom. At first, I remember the first time I went to Europe, I was very, very nervous, very scared, because I didn't really know very many people. There was a couple of connections. This is years before even the idea of a cell phone or a text message or, being able to reach somebody. You had to put weird coins into weird foreign machines and try to figure out how the phone operated, and then have a number to call. And then that person had to actually be there when the phone rang, because if they were out, they were out, So I don't even know how we made so many connections, and I got all over the world somehow. But I do remember going to Europe the first time and being very nervous. It was, actually, the reason I went was not for the punk rock and so on, which I didn't even really know there was a whole punk scene in England. My son, who was about 2 years old at that time, had spent the summer with my mother-in-law and father-in-law in Paris. And I wanted to just kind of establish that they couldn't keep him in Europe and that I was part of his life. I'd broken up with my wife about a year earlier. So anyway, I went to see my son in Paris with the original idea. But then I had already started working with a couple of magazines by then. It was 1976, I think. I was working with Bravo magazine and Music Life in Japan. Bravo magazine in Europe was the biggest magazine, the rock and roll magazine in the world. It was a weekly, color, gorgeous rock and roll magazine. And they had a poster. Once a month, they had a poster section of the most beautiful posters. And I was bringing them a whole bunch of my pictures, hoping that I'd finally make some money. And the posters paid like $200 instead of $25. Prices for rock and roll photographers are very low. And so I wanted to meet him, and I knew the editor of the Melody Maker in England, and I knew Malcolm McLaren in England. And that was about it. And so I was going off to Europe with very little money. I don't know if we didn't have the credit card system we had nowadays. I think you had American Express checks that you would take to an embassy or a bank or something. You'd sign it, and they would give you whatever foreign currency you could buy with. That's how you carried money back in those days. But I made friends pretty quickly. I got to, with my son in Paris was a great couple of days, and it was really my first introduction to Paris. It was one of my favorite cities in the world. I love to just walk around Paris. And then I went to Germany, and I had to wait a little while for the author to come out of a meeting, and I'm all excited. I brought 200 of my best pictures to show him for this poster magazine. And he came out of the meeting, and he said, "Oh, good to see you, Bob. Sorry about the meeting. We just had this long meeting about the poster section, and we've had so much trouble getting good pictures for it that we've just decided to cancel the whole poster section." And there was my whole budget, and everything I was going to use to pay for my trip to Europe was down the drain. So back to plan B, which is usually no plan. You have to figure out what to do next. Yeah. But I went to Hamburg. After that, there was another magazine. I'm forgetting the name of it. But I met the editor there and showed her the pictures, and they wanted to keep some pictures, on consignment. And I said, well, I need a deposit. And she said, well, we don't do that. We pay on publication. I said, well, I'm not leaving my pictures without any money, because I was broke. I needed money. And I just kept saying, I needed money. Like, give me some money. And so they gave me a check that I could cash down the block at a bank. And I remember doing that and then getting to the airport. In those days, there was the Red Gang, and there was terrorists in Germany. And it was the beginning of searching, and they had guards and machine guns. I remember getting to the airport a little late because I cashing the check and running up to the guards. And they were all nervous, these 18-year-old kids with these giant machine guns. And right on the top of my camera bag was a movie camera. I was doing 8mm film at that point, I think. And I opened the thing up, and they see the camera. It looks like a little machine gun, kind of Uzi or something. And I put my hands up. I said, photography, photography. But I got out of there, and I got to England. And actually, the fun part about the German trip was after he told me the magazine closed, he told me he had hooked me up because there was the beer festival, the Oktoberfest. Yep. In Munich is the big deal over there. And he set me up to go over there and have some, beer. But I went alone. Like, he had to go do something, and I'm like trying to figure out in German, how do you order a beer? And it's these giant places with 2,000 people drinking what I would consider a pitcher of beer, but they all each had one of them. So I got kind of hungover. And so I was in Hamburg, like way hungover, sitting in the corner going, I need money, I need money. You know, it was pretty funny. And I got to England, and I knew the editor of the Melody Maker. He was a very conservative, nice guy. His kids were named Miles and John, after Miles Davis and John Lennon.
Oh, wow.
And that's, you know, he was kind of from that generation. But I also knew Malcolm McLaren, who said, oh, he found me a place to stay and sleep off the hangover. And then he took me to a place called Club Louise, which was formerly kind of a gay club. But so they were used to unusual people in there. And in the basement, I met the future of punk rock, which I didn't even know existed. And Malcolm took me to this place. And I met the Sex Pistols, the Clash, Susie and the Banshees, John, what's his name, John Savage, and Caroline Coon, who became the writers who publicized the whole punk scene in England. Billy Idol was there. You know, all kinds of people. Marco Perroni became he played with Billy in the Gen X, and then he became a big producer. And I just made friends like pretty quickly. They were kind of interesting people, and Malcolm was encouraging me to take pictures, and he obviously knew all these people and told them that I was from Cream magazine. They had no respect for Rolling Stone or any of the past, any of the, you know, no Led Zeppelin, no, you know, Queen Elizabeth, no Beatles. But they liked John Lennon, and the fact that I worked with him, they really respected John. And so they let me take a lot of pictures, and it was kind of awkward because I didn't really know these people. Like in New York, I knew people, and I was taking pictures of my friends, you know, Legs McNeil, David Johansen, Richard Hill. But in England, it was these like weirdos. You know, Johnny Rotten was very rotten. He was like an obnoxious guy. He kept saying these obnoxious things, and I didn't give a shit because, you know, he wasn't. It wasn't on me. It was him that was obnoxious. You know, so he says I'm obnoxious. Who cares what he says about me? You know, that's his problem.
Yeah.
You know, I just met the guy. I don't care what he thinks about me. So, and most of the other people were very nice, actually. I remember the first time I walked into Malcolm encouraged me to come over to the Sex Pistols rehearsal loft and take some pictures of them. And Paul Cook and Steve Jones were there, and I don't remember which one said it, but I walked in and they said, oh, hey, mate, would you care for a cup of tea? You know, as English people do. You know, so that seemed very normal to me. It didn't seem very threatening to have a cup of tea with a couple of musicians, you know.
Right on.
And then I wanted to take some pictures of them playing, like in the rehearsal thing. And it was a little awkward because Johnny had, they just come back from a tour in Sweden. Johnny had an operation for polyps on his throat. He had screamed too much or something, and he had an operation. And he wasn't supposed to sing or speak very loudly. He was supposed to let it heal. And I pointed out that I was taking pictures, not movies, and he didn't have to make a sound. He just had to hold the microphone and look like he was standing in front of the band, you know. You didn't have to turn on the amps, you know what I mean? So, but they did, and they started playing, and they played Substitute, which is a Who song, and they played an Alice Cooper song, and I thought, this isn't weird. This is just a little faster than things I already know, you know, and they seemed pretty good. And Johnny had trouble holding back, and he actually started singing. So I do have some pretty good pictures of them rehearsing in their little tiny rehearsal loft, and some pictures around the area. And then Malcolm was running in and out that day, and he came in and he said, oh, Bob, you're here on a good day. We're going to EMI. We're going to sign the contract. So I was in the right place at the right time. You know?
Well, it's funny you say that. A lot of people from Germany and some of the places you mentioned gave a thumbs up and said hello during that. So hello, everyone. Appreciate your engagement here. Right place, right time. And you mentioned it earlier, and I was thinking about it just now when you were talking and saying those stories. But then it's what you do with it. It's doing the right thing.
Right.
You know, it's not. It's
well,
not
I got some good pictures of them. Well, I got good pictures of them sitting around the office. It's the only time I actually think I got a picture of the band, or the whole band together with Malcolm. It was kind of an interesting day because we've been drinking beer all afternoon. We did drink quite a bit back in those days. I mean, I don't remember any bottles of water anywhere. I remember a lot of cans of beer. You know, if you were thirsty, you had a beer.
Funny how that happens.
If you wanted to drink, you had some booze, you know, but drinking beer wasn't drinking. That was being thirsty, you know.
Yeah.
So we were just drinking, you know, or they had tea because they're English, you know. But it was mostly beer. And then we went to the record company and they popped out a bottle of champagne to celebrate. And you put a bottle of champagne on top of a stomach full of beer, and it's not going to mix well.
Yeah.
So I think it was Steve Jones who threw up in the parking lot, which was the beginning of their not really liking the band. It didn't last long. They kicked them off the label pretty quickly. I came back a year later, and Sid was in the band, and I remember I got there right after another controversy when they had said, a curse word on TV on a slow news day, and they got a front page ad for, it's a rock and roll band. It said a curse word on TV. That's not news,
Yeah.
But it was big news there. It was on the front page of every paper. It really made the band. It made punk rock. It unfortunately gave punk a very bad name because people thought, chaos for cash, the filthy, what do they call them, Anyway, there was a very, very, very negative, destroy kind of attitude just because there's one couple of words, the guy. And the guy who egged him on, Bill Grundy, was drunk and was like coming on to some of the girls and being kind of rude himself and kind of egged Steve on. And Steve said something rude. He said, "Go ahead, say it again. And he did, and so they got headlines all over the place. And so A&M was the next one. A&M signed them for like a week or 10 days or something, dropped them, and actually, because of the contract, they had to give them a £75,000 cancellation fee. And Malcolm says, they're giving us £75,000 to go away. What are we, a disease? They're afraid of us? And he was making all this press out of it. It was actually a good thing for him because they got extra money for nothing, and much more press. So it was kind of funny to me because the band was not trying to be good. They were trying to make noise and be obnoxious. I mean, Johnny was just, spewing insults and curses to everybody around him, just trying to be obnoxious and doing a good job of it, which I thought was very funny. Because, I could see it as a shtick because he just kind of did it so on purpose.
Yeah.
And the other guys were just such nice guys. In fact, what's his name? Glenn Matlock is so nice, they kicked him out of the band. And he wrote the hits. He wrote Anarchy and, a bunch of the hits. So at least he's got some publishing probably, But Sid was certainly the punk of the punks. And there's a funny story about that. I think I put it in the book that I found out much later. Only in the last couple of years I found this out, that when Malcolm wanted to replace Glenn, he was looking for another singer. And no, actually he was waiting because there's another part of it was that Malcolm wanted to start a band. He wanted to work with the New York Dolls. He loved the New York Dolls. Came to America, they were falling apart. Johnny and Jerry had serious heroin habits. The bass player Arthur was a alcoholic, drank more than anybody ever seen. He would wake up and drink like a whole pint of vodka, like people have a glass of water in the morning. And that would kind of set him straight so he could start drinking and have a day. So Malcolm got him in the hospital, and Johnny and Jerry saved their lives, but they were really falling apart. He tried to get them on the road, took them to Florida with the idea of taking them out of New York into a place where people weren't expecting or had ever seen anything like that. Kind of what he actually did do with the Sex Pistols, taking them down south and putting them up in front of rednecks instead of CBGB regulars, But the band just fell apart. They wanted to come back to New York and get high, and it just didn't work. So Malcolm and Sylvain took a trip across the South to New Orleans to buy records and starting to look for musicians to put together a band for Sylvain, one of the new band. And Malcolm was going to help manage that. And then they came up with the idea that Malcolm was going to go back to England and get some English musicians, put together a band, and Syl was going to come and be the leader. So Malcolm went back to England. I got a phone call. I had gone to Japan a year earlier with Yoko Ono and met the promoter, Yuya Yoshida, and a couple other people. And I got a phone call from Yuya that he wanted to bring the New York Dolls to Japan. And they hadn't been working all winter, and this was the spring, and he was offering them some tens of thousands of dollars. And they wanted to get the money and pay their rent. They were like, they owed months on the rent. I remember Dave was in debt to friends and stuff. So Syl decided to go with David. They just had to get some new members because the guy says, just you and Syl and some new members, and you call yourself New York Dolls. You must bring New York Dolls to Japan and influence the Japanese. And the money was good, so they said yes. So I had set that up, and Malcolm got tired of waiting for Sylvain because Syl went to Japan with David. and he wanted to put the band together. He already had Steve and Glenn and Paul. And he didn't have a singer. He was waiting for Sylvain. So Vivian had recommended there was a guy named John who was hanging out in the store. And he was a good oddball who might make a good singer. And so Malcolm went down to the store, and there was this guy, Johnny Rotten, and there's a famous story about how they put him up in front of the jukebox, and he sang an Alice Cooper song, and they thought he was fantastic, and he went around a corner and made it in the pub, and they made a deal to be in the band, and he started rehearsing with him. And about 2 weeks later, Vivian said, how's it going? And Malcolm said, I got that guy John that you mentioned. He's really good. And Vivian came to rehearsal and said, what do you mean you got that guy Johnny Rotten? I meant his friend, John Ritchie, the one known as Sid Vicious. And so apparently Sid was supposed to be, was Vivian's first choice for the leader of the Sex Pistols.
Oh my goodness, that's awesome.
But things worked out the way they did. The Sex Pistols were a great group. Sid became a hero, not right away. The band, I thought they were bad. I thought it was a whole publicity thing that Malcolm was just having fun with the press. I never thought it was really going to go anywhere, especially they came to America. I thought I was just going to see him in New York. I had no intention of going across America and spending time with this terrible band. I couldn't imagine anybody caring about them. Other bands like Blondie and Patti Smith and New York Dolls were so much better. And so apparently there was a visa problem with Sid, so they didn't get to New York because the trip was delayed. They were supposed to be on the Saturday Night Live, but they had to cancel. And in fact, it was Malcolm who recommended Elvis Costello. And if you YouTube the Saturday Night Live with Elvis Costello, you'll see the drummer is wearing a T-shirt that says "Thanks, Malk."
Ah, there you go.
Because Malcolm got him that gig, and that broke Elvis in America. That made Elvis's career, set up the rest of his life. And anyway, so I went to Atlanta because I already had pictures of the band a couple of times in England, and I went to Luxembourg with them on one of my English trips. So I just wanted some pictures of them in America, and I went to Atlanta. And it was after the gig, they had a chaos gig. It was he played a Chinese restaurant that turned into a bar at night. And all these kids came and saw something they'd never seen before, and throwing things and screaming and spitting. And it was kind of chaotic. And afterwards, I was saying goodbye. They had a bus. They were going across America. I was so long, Malcolm, have fun. Too bad I can't come with you, but I'm sure you're going to have a great time. And I meant I couldn't come with you because I didn't have any plan to go with him. And Malcolm said, well, yeah, you can't come, Bob, because we're only allowed 12 on the bus, and there's the band, and there's Sophie and me, and the girl. Well, that's only 11, Bob. Why don't you get on the bus? And I was like, what? And the guy next to me, another photographer, said, well, I'll come, Malcolm. And Malcolm said, no, I'm sorry, Bob asked first. And I was like, I asked? When was that? So I got on the bus, and Malcolm hooked it up to the record company, paid for my hotel room, and I actually got a per diem, I think. So yeah, I went with only my camera bag, and you pick up things. I bought a toothbrush. After a couple of days, I ended up buying 1 or 2 T-shirts so I could change my shirt once in a while. But I can live in the same pants for 10 days. An interesting thing happened actually about the boots, because I had a pair of combat boots that were similar to, actually the same kind of pair that Johnny Thunders wore. Because I had bought the pair for Johnny. Johnny asked me to buy him a pair and bring it because I was coming to England, and somebody had taken his or something, so he asked me to buy him a new pair, and I liked them, so I bought myself a pair. And Sid really wanted the same boots as Johnny Thunders, and we were on the bus, and he kept looking at my boots for a couple of days. And one day I went to sleep on the couch in the front of the bus, and I took my boots off and laid down on the couch, and I woke up, and Sid was wearing my boots, and his boots were sitting there where my boots had been. And he said, do you mind if I wear your boots a little while? You can have mine, and I tried his boots on, and actually his fit really well, and they were comfortable, and they were paratrooper boots, so they had a wide bottom, and they were really comfortable. My boots had a steel tip on, a steel toe on it. They were construction boots, and I had actually stood on one of the toes at one point in a club to try to get an inch or two higher over the people, and I bent it, and when you walked, it was mostly okay, but sometimes you stepped a certain way, and it would kind of dig into your toe, and I hated it. I was planning to get a new pair. So Sid said he would wear them. I said, fine, you wear them, I'll wear the comfortable ones. And what the best part about that story was that all three separately, Paul and Steve and even Johnny Rotten, came up to me and said, like, we like you being here. We like you being on the bus with us. And don't let Sid push you around. If you want your boots back, just say so. He can't take your boots. Like, don't that your boots back and you think that then you wouldn't be on the tour. You're on the tour because we want you here, not because Sid has anything to say about it, which was really sweet of them to tell me that. But in fact, I enjoyed wearing Sid's because they were so much more comfortable than mine. And the way that worked out, on the last day of the tour in San Francisco, they wanted to buy American leather jackets. So the promoter took us to this giant supermarket of leather, and it was kind of a gay store too. I remember Sid was buying KY jelly. He ended up using it to spike up his hair. It was Johnny Rotten. Sid put all the KY in his hair, and Johnny said, "What are you going to do now, Sid? Stick your head up your ass?" So, you know, we had a lot of fun on that tour. But anyway, in that store, they had the exact same kind of boots, these engineer boots with the steel tip. And I said, "Hey, Sid, here's the same boots. Get yourself your own pair in your size. You break them in, and they're yours, you know, instead of trying to wear mine." He said, "No, I like yours. They're already broken in." And I thought, "You're broken in? They're broken, actually." And he said, "I'm going to buy you a new pair to replace yours." I said, "Great." So I got a new pair, and I have Sid's boots as well.
Do you still have them?
I still have Sid's boots.
That's awesome.
And what was interesting, later I found out from one of the roadies, I think after the gig or something, Sid went to one of the roadies' places, and the roadie had like knee-high boots. And I have pictures of Sid. Half the tour, he wore my boots. Mm-hmm. So I have a picture of Sid wearing my boots. But then on the last day, he got this other guy's boots. And my boots, I actually saw, I have a picture of it. There is a castle in England somewhere that is a museum of criminology. And my boots are in a glass vitrine case with what is purported to be Sid's necklace with his lock, as, you know, relics of Sid Vicious, the murderer.
Oh, wow.
Which I don't think he's a murderer, by the way.
Yeah.
He loved Nancy. Nobody knows really what happened that night.
Fascinating.
But anyway, when the Sex Pistols broke up in San Francisco, I came home with 70 rolls of film from the 10 days on tour. And I developed them for the next couple of days. And then there was a big blizzard, and I was just in the dark room through the whole blizzard, 3 days of snow. And when it broke and I had enough pictures, I went out to take a break and see what I had missed. I've been away on tour for 2 weeks. And I walked all the way across Bleecker Street because the city was shut down from the snow. And I went to CBGB's, and I walked in, and Johnny Rotten was there. He had come to New York on his way home, and he was with this other photographer friend. And he said, "Did you hear the news, mate?" And he had a T-shirt. We all got T-shirts that said, "I survived the Sex Pistols tour." Warner Brothers gave everybody a T-shirt. and he had written on his, but the band didn't. And I said, "What's that?" He goes, "We broke up, mate." I said, "You broke up?" Like, everybody in the whole world was looking at the Sex Pistols that week. I thought I was selling 6 and 8 page stories to all the magazines. It turned into a postage stamp size obituary. All my pictures of the Sex Pistols went into a bottom drawer. They're still there on the bottom drawer because it's a big drawer. But they went into a bottom drawer because we never really had to go there.
Oh, wow.
For 6 years. Barely opened that drawer. Nobody talked about Sex Pistols.
Wow.
It's funny how time flies, but for like 6 years, that was over. Then Alex Cox made the Sid and Nancy movie. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, Sid Vicious was a worldwide hero.
Yeah.
And everybody was talking about punk rock, and Sid was the guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's because, you know, there's very few films of Sid actually being Sid. There's a couple of videos on stage where he's kind of bouncing around. There's a couple of videos where he's sitting next to Nancy and kind of drooling and passing out. And you don't really see anything. But Gary Oldman is the most charismatic, crazy person in Hollywood. And Gary Oldman gave Sid a very charismatic, fun personality. And people don't realize that when they think of Sid Vicious, they're imagining Gary Oldman. Because the only images, the only offstage conversing, hanging out with Nancy, talking to people, being Sid is really Gary Oldman.
Wow.
And I got to tell him that one day at the Sunset Marquee. I was staying out there, and he was there. And I went up to him and I said, "You know, I owe you a big thanks because I've sold a lot of Sid Vicious pictures over the years." And I told him, I said, "Sid's only famous because of you." And he had never really thought of it that way. But then I met his wife, and she came to an opening a couple of days later. And she totally agreed with me. But they had never really thought about it that way.
Well, that's a fascinating story, and I think that, you know, it talks a little bit about it touches upon what we were talking about in terms of capturing the feeling, and your images and your stories have always, they've really captured the artist and the person, not just the performance of that night, which is something special too. I'm curious because Artist Waves, a lot of what I love to do is to collaborate with photographers, music photographers, and feature their work in articles or any features that we have that are relevant to the subject matter. It's been really, like, all these photos around me are from photographs of photographers that I've collaborated with because they capture the moment. And I'm curious too, I don't know if you preferred photographing off stage as opposed to on stage in the moment, or if you love them both. But I've been thinking a lot about my music photographer friends during, you know, this pandemic. And obviously a lot of the conversation is around, there are no concerts. The artists are home. The artists aren't working. They're not touring. But what about the photographers? What about some of the journalists too that
Well,
don't
it's
get...
a whole industry. I mean, you talk about Broadway theater being closed, and or you know, nightclubs being closed. It's not just the musicians; it's the bartenders. It's the doorman who stands there and asks for your ID. He's out of a job.
Yeah.
All those people live somewhere. They all pay rent. All my friends are out of work. It's a huge tragedy. They've just passed something here called Save Our Stages, but they're going to save Lincoln Center. They're going to save Carnegie Hall, hopefully. I mean, I don't know if they'll have enough money for that. Or for all the people who work, the people who paint the stages, the people who pull the ropes, the people who talk into the microphones and say, turn the light to the left. You know, the people who turn the light to the left. All of those other people, not just the guy on stage. For every guy on stage, there's 50 people setting up that stage.
Yeah.
You know, even in nightclubs, people don't believe how many people, like a simple nightclub with a bartender, you walk in, there's a doorman, a bartender, there's 25 people working there. You know, there's sound men, there's all kinds of people. There's people who clean up. There's those guys who push through the crowd carrying the extra beers. You know, there are all kinds of people who work there, and they're all out of work.
Yeah.
My friend Jesse Mallon's doing a really good job of doing live shows.
I've watched them. I love Jesse.
He started in his apartment with a phone, but he built it up to like an 8-camera shoot in the nightclub. He's bringing in guest, stars. Everybody comes in with a mask. They stand 8 feet away.
Yeah.
But he's got the most live experience weekly that I've seen. But maybe because I don't watch too many others. Jesse's my friend, so I watch him.
Yeah, his is great. His is very inspiring. And you made me think too, another artist that I believe he was part of your introduction with was Green Day, because I was supposed to see them this past summer, and it was
one
as
show
was
I was
everybody.
really looking forward to.
Me too. And it was just one of many I was supposed to see, but that was a highlight. I'm curious too. I got one more question here, and then
also because I have a book that I just published last September, a year ago.
I
published a book with Green Day.
I'm curious about.
And they contributed to the book. There's all kinds of quotes from them, and they were going to carry it in their merchandise starting in Singapore in February.
Yeah.
And the whole tour just went down like dominoes because they were supposed to do Asia first, and then Russia, and then Europe, and that's the way the disease went. It started in Asia, it went through Russia, went through Europe, and then they canceled America finally. They're holding out, hoping against hope, and now they're planning to come back next summer, but who knows? I'm not anxious to get into a crowded room with a whole bunch of people.
Same here.
Or with masks. It's a horrible situation. The disease. I have some friends who've gotten sick. Right at the beginning, I had a very good friend who got sick and died within a few days. He had a temperature on Thursday and he was dead on Tuesday. Another friend who got sick in March and is still sick has not had a day since then that she hasn't been in pain or difficulty with her heart or her brain or her lungs. And then other people, I just got an email from a friend of mine that said, well, I got COVID in October and I'm better and everything's okay.
Yeah.
I was like, really?
And
the piano player, Dave Bryant from Bon Jovi, he was sick in March, very sick. And then his wife lost her sense of taste for 2 days and got better. And then he got better and everything's fine.
Yeah. It's crazy.
And Hal, my friend Hal, is still dead. So it's just I'm staying away from everybody I can.
Yeah.
I miss the live shows. TV doesn't do it for me. I've never been a TV person. Watching a show on a computer is not like. I miss my friends. I mean, I go to shows not just to stand there and hear music, but to run into all my friends and catch up. What are you doing? What's your project?
Yeah.
I got most of my work in nightclubs. Running into people saying, "Oh, I'm recording this. I need a picture for that," or "I'm doing a show," or "Here, I manage this guy." I don't meet anybody anymore. I haven't met anybody since March.
Yeah, I miss it too. I miss it too. It's been a tough one, but I'm grateful for opportunities like this where we get to talk. And if you don't mind, I want to ask you, just in our remaining 2-3 minutes here, I want to ask you one more question about John Lennon. Just bringing this kind of whole thing full circle and all the topics we touched upon in your book. If I were sitting there with you right now, or you make it like we're sitting on your porch with a glass of wine at night, and I said to you, Bob, can you tell me a story about John Lennon? A quick story about John Lennon. And I'm sure there's a million different ways your mind can go. Maybe it's a story behind one of the iconic photos or something like that. But someone who had deep intrigue and drew such inspiration from him and was going to take something from your story, what would you say in closing?
Well, that's a big one story out of 9 years. Read my book. I have a book, John Lennon. Where is that?
I have read that one too.
Yeah, there's more than one story in this one. This I did in 2005. It's actually the first book that I did with a lot of words. Imagine this backwards, actually. But it's John Lennon, the New York Years.
Yeah.
It was published in 2005. It's still in print. It was republished in 2015 for the anniversary, I think 25th anniversary, whatever it was back then, or 35th. Anyway, in 2015, the 10th anniversary of my book, whatever. So, and we added 16 pages and a new cover. But that's the first book I wrote a lot of words instead of just captions with showing the pictures like a picture book. This one I wrote a whole story about what it was like to know John Lennon and hang out with him for years and see him go through changes, because when we met, there was a lot of drinking going on. He was working with the Elephant's Memory on. He was just finishing the Sometime in New York album when I first met him and took pictures for a magazine article. It was how I met him, and they liked my pictures and asked me to come back, and I started to come back more often. And they did a Elephant's Memory album over the summer. Played Madison Square Garden. Did a Yoko Ono album in the fall. We were drinking a lot. We refer to that as the tequila sessions. I remember by the end of the summer, there were so many bottles of tequila. I didn't want to look like I was just coming to drink their booze, so I would bring a bottle of my own, and the band brought about 6 bottles for 5 guys, and John and Yoko would bring 2 or 3 bottles, to supply the studio. So there was about 11 people with 12 bottles of tequila that were empty every night when we finished, and then we would go out to a home restaurant to get cognacs and steaks. Actually, go out drinking and have fun. So it was very drunk and very crazy, and particularly the night that Nixon was elected, John got really out of hand, cursing at everybody, coming on to some girl in front of Yoko. It was very embarrassing. And that's when she kind of got tired of him being a nasty drunk, and she wanted to keep working. She had often gotten bad reviews, so she was the concert at Madison Square Garden, which he was looking forward to, and we enjoyed very much as a rock and roll event, because the Elephant's Memory were a rollicking kind of 1950s bar band, rhythm and blues band, and they would always warm up by playing some Bo Diddley and Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley, and then get into the John Lennon songs, which was actually a fun moment for me, because I met him doing the Elephant's Memory songs and the John, the Sometime in New York City songs. And in the rehearsal, they would do a couple of old rock and rollers, and then all of a sudden, he was singing Imagine or Cold Turkey. And it was that voice. It wasn't this guy that I met in New York named John, a funny guy. It was, oh my God, he's John Lennon, the Beatle. Like when you hear the voice with the song, it's like, he really is the Beatle. You know, it was kind of, I remember the first time I heard it, it put chills on me because I was getting so comfortable with the guy, and all of a sudden it's like, he's the Beatle, you know. And but the concert got terrible reviews because all the critics wanted the Beatles, and John wanted rock and roll, and he wanted politics, and he wanted Yoko, and he had Yoko sing a couple of songs, "Sisters Were Sisters," and you know, some very politically oriented songs, and the critics hated it, and the audience really didn't like Yoko either. It took a long time for people to understand what Yoko was doing. I mean, nowadays she's very popular, but back then, boy,
yeah,
you couldn't mention that name in public. And so John went off to Los Angeles. I think I'm still healthy today because I didn't go. I didn't have the money to follow him around. I live in New York. You know, he went to L.A. I couldn't just go and hang out, you know.
yeah.
But I heard stories about what he was doing, and I often wondered during that time if he would come back to New York or just keep going and end up in a really nice place in Hawaii like I would have done if I was in that situation. I thought, Maui, here I come. You know, what are you doing in L.A.? You know?
Yeah.
But luckily, you know, he had a bit of an embarrassing moment at the Troubadour, and he came back with his tail between his legs. But it helped him to sober up, changed his life. He spent the next 6 months getting sober, and then finally saw Yoko at Elton's concert, and went to visit as a sober person. And she finally, you know, the whole time he was away, the 18-month lost weekend, he was in touch with Yoko almost every day, calling her and asking if he could come back. And she kept saying, no, you're fucking drunk. And his friends were calling. Jim Kelly talks about it. There's another movie besides the ABC movie, a really good movie is The American Masters, which I think is online, called John Lennon versus the USA, or the USA versus John Lennon, which has to do a lot of it has to do with the immigration case, but it's mostly about John's life in New York.
Yeah.
And all the people in it who talked were friends who actually were with John. And Jim Keltner talks about calling Yoko and saying, take him back. He's so drunk. He's obnoxious. We can't deal with him. And she said, well, you wanted him. You got him. Because when he was with Yoko, a lot of friends were saying, why are you staying home? Why don't you come out? We'll all party and we'll have fun and everything. And when he did, they were like, oh, man, this guy's the most obnoxious guy at the party. Can't just send him home. And Yoko was like, no, I don't want him. You know, you deal with him. They had to tie him up one night because he was getting violent with people. And he was not a good drunk. He was, you know, English, they would get legless and you know, not remember what stupid shit they did. But anyways, after he got embarrassed in the newspapers, he came back and sobered up, and it was a whole different life. I saw him a couple of months after he was with Yoko and did a session, and he told us that Yoko was pregnant. And that was very exciting news. And then about a month after Sean was born, he called me to come and take pictures to send to their family. And that's where I have pictures of John with the baby. And it was the biggest smile on anybody I've ever seen. He was the happiest person I've ever seen.
That's awesome.
And he stayed sober. And there's an interesting part about that. It's hard for me to tell one story about John. But at one point, John and Yoko had a flu, and they were sick for a couple of days. And when they got better, instead of just going back to their normal diet of everything, they listened to their friend Dick Gregory, and they went on a fast for 40 days, a liquid fast of just fruit or vegetable juice. Jeez. But just drinking juice or water, no solid food. I saw him about 10 days in on that, and he was tripping. He was like, oh, my mind is so clear, and I'm so open, and so amazing. And the way he was dealing with it, this is something I thought, it's just an example of how intelligent John was, that all he could think about was food and eating, because he was not eating all day, and it was like obsessing because they were doing it. It wasn't just happening. It was they had to think about not eating, you know.
Yeah.
So home the whole time. So what he did was he got a lot of cookbooks and a lot of books about nutrition and the history of food. And he read the cookbooks, and he would read an elaborate 2 or 3 page recipe and have a whole fantasy about food. Then turn the page and have another fantasy and think about food all day without eating.
Wow, that's
but we're thinking these amazing, delicious meals, but without actually doing it.
That's an interesting
way to satisfy it.
Bob,
made it to.
I think
Are
Instagram's
we
going to
done?
cut it. I think I'm getting the countdown that Instagram's going to cut us. They put the
Okay.
hour
Well, bye
time.
for now. Read
I
the
just
book.
want to, so they don't do that.
John
Right
Lennon, the New
place,
York
right
Years,
time is the book.
and,
John Lennon
and my
is the
new
book.
book, the biography, Right Place, Right Time, out now.
I want to get. I want to make sure I have the opportunity to thank you first for doing this and for speaking with me, and
my
also
pleasure.
for your endless inspiration to artists and writers and musicians, photographers all over the world. You've certainly inspired me with your approach and your photos and your work.
Well, I think I can tell
Especially with
people don't
Lennon,
let
so
fear hold you back. You know, I
right on.
love peace and quiet, but I thrive in chaos.
Well,
And you know, just get out there and live your life and do it.
right
Don't
on.
be, you know, I mean, be afraid. I was afraid all the time, but I went and
Yeah.
did it. You know?
Good. Perfect.
And fear is an energy. It keeps you going, you know.
I'll take that message, and I'm sure everybody else will too. This
All
has been
right.
such a pleasure and an honor. Thank you, Bob.
Oh,
I
my
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
All right. Well, thanks. See you again.
Take care.
All right.
Have a good one.
Be safe.
You too.
Okay. All right.
All right, Bob Gruen, the legend. I hate to shut that off. I hate to cut it off, especially when we're talking about Lennon. I could have kept going for a long time, just sitting there listening and asking questions. But wow, what stories! The beauty and the challenge with hosting on this platform is that you're capped at an hour. But for people like Bob, you could keep going for 2, 3, or the rest of the day. But thank you for chiming in. Thank you for engaging. Thank you for checking out Artist Waves Live. I'm Jeff Gorra. Season 2, this has been the start. Next guest will probably be announced the end of this week, so please check that out. The article I was referencing, the day I was born, the day John Lennon died, is on artistwaves.com homepage right now. And I'll send you off with this message from Bob, which is photography, art, it's not just a hobby. It's a passion. It's not just a hobby. Take it and run with it. And thank you very much. See you next time. Thanks to everyone in all the other countries outside the U.S. that chimed in. Much love.